Okay, so it's Friday. We're at the end of week one, so it's pretty amazing. A week from now will actually be by the end of class talking about the final project. So it's pretty astounding how quickly Jan term goes. Excuse me. So what we're going to start off with today is taking a look at the homework, and thank you. Everybody turned in their homework. Thank you, Angela, for already starting to make comments. So that's one of the things we're going to do today is take a look at it as a group. But the nice thing about VoiceThread is that you're able to look at it at any time and make comments yourself. So we're going to start there, and I apologize for some reason my voice is just not holding up well today. Okay, so I'm going to share a screen and jump right into VoiceThread. So one of the things before we even go through and talk about each one of your pieces is just to remind you, when you come in, take a look at VoiceThread. Really nice to get comments from your peers, the people in the class. So the way you can do that is, again, hover over the middle and you see that plus sign. If you click on the plus sign, it gives you a few options. The ABC allows you to type in a comment. So when you click that, you get a text box. The phone allows you to phone in a comment. Probably not going to be something that is that useful for most people. The microphone allows you to talk a comment. So generally when I leave comments for you, I'm going to just talk the comment. The camera is if you want to have yourself present, that you are somebody who wants to not only give a comment, but you want us to see you giving the comment. And then that plus is like it is when you're putting a project in. For some reason, if you want to add an actual image that you're adding to your comment, you could do it there. Okay, so when you make a comment, what happens is you see a little box on the left. When you scroll over it, it shows you what the comment is. So AD Angela Dean left a comment. And again, it's really nice. If I do this and look at all of those the way it is when you're going to put something in, anytime you see one of those little yellow tabs, that would be how you know that there's a comment, for example, on one of your pieces or comments. So if you see a tab, it just means that somebody has left a comment for you. Okay, so now let's just take a look at what we have. Remember that we were working towards using contour line and cross contour. So this was that early part of just beginning to learn the basic line technique, which was the foundation for what it is we're working with now. So this was just pre-cross hatching. So taking a look at Alicia's. Alicia, what do you like the best about your piece? What part of your drawing made you the happiest? Like, what do you?
Middle vase.
Pardon?
I feel like I had better detail in the middle vase than anywhere else.
Okay, what do you think about the middle vase that when you say detail and it also sort of grabs your attention, what might be some of the reasons that that middle vase has so much appeal?
Because of the way that the lines are in the same shape of the outside of the base.
So again, you hit it right on the head. You've got this really cool shape. I mean, it's got that really distinct bulge to the top, and then it tapers down. And you use lines that 100% move around that shape, describing that same extreme kind of large top tapering in to a nice slender base. So that consistency is very nice. There's a little thing that happens compositionally, and we've not really talked much about composition except when we've talked about positive and negative, but we'll try to start adding some additional things. I'm just looking, I heard, oh, there we go, Rosalie, yay. Okay, so everybody is here. There's something that adds a little bit of a pop to this in terms of a composition. Can anybody point out something that creates visual space in this composition?
The shadows really stood out to me when it first popped on the screen. They're very artistic and unique, and I thought they were really cool.
Again, that is a interesting description, a nice way to describe it, artistic. Remember, when you're making decisions as an artist, I've already given you the media, the material we're using. So one of the three parts was already decided for you. And you had a subject that was already assigned. You were working with some shapes. So that third part where the artist makes decisions, the subjective content, that would be the artistic. So that the way you describe that would be almost a perfect way to point to what the artist brings into something, how the artist adds some of their own viewpoint or ideas. And those cast shadows are just sort of these cool terms. Stylized refers to where you simplify something so that you're conveying an idea with almost shorthand, where you've reduced it to a way that it conveys meaning. And all these cast shadows have that same kind of almost diagonal implied movement kind of pattern to them. Diagonals in any composition indicate dynamism or movement. So the more diagonals that are present in a design, the more activated the composition will feel. So the fact that you have, and in this one, let me grab a pencil. Let's get something that'll show up. So you have these diagonals that are working through the composition. You have three primary shapes. So something we haven't really talked about is called the rule of thirds, where you think about how a page would be split approximately in thirds. Those intersections are sort of thought of as sweet spots. They tend to be interesting places to create some interest in your drawing. And if you look at this drawing, it's rather nice because we have an object with some kind of an interest catching our attention at several of those sweet spots, several of those rule of thirds intersections. So in that way, you've got a couple cool things happening there. And we haven't even talked about that. A lot of that is intuitive. There's a sense of how we like things to feel. There's also something that, another topic we haven't talked about, but when you perceive a design, any shapes with our particular physiology, the way we look with our eyes and the way our brain interprets, there's certain things that if they are present, we absolutely interpret it as meaning there is physical space present. Is there something that's happening in this composition that absolutely triggers your brain to say, wow, I've just moved those objects into a deeper physical space or illusion of physical space? Can anybody see something that's happening?
Is it the way she has the shadows? You know how they go from the large to the tapered line.
So the shadows are one of those things that absolutely do give us space. So that beautiful pattern, the diagonals, they lead us back into space. What is something else that's happening that we only understand? The only way our brain can, there's a term, if anybody's taken social psychology, does anybody know the term? Oh my gosh, I just went completely blank. Wow, that worries me when I'm getting that old.
I'm not sure what the
Go ahead. Rosalie?
Picture, like they're offset. It's not all in one line. There's something in
Okay.
front, in the middle, and behind.
Exactly. So when you are saying in front, what is it that tells you that something is in front? It might seem so obvious that it's like, well, what word are you looking for? What is happening that you see the base of the objects are in different positions? And then what is physically happening to also tell you something is in the front?
The overlapping.
Bing, yay. There we go. So it seems so obvious that it's like, oh my gosh, is that all he wanted? But that's exactly it. Overlap. If there is any overlap in a design, that is one of 5 triggers or 5 clues that your brain will absolutely interpret that that means there has to be space present. So and then not only is it overlap, but it's really beautiful space. So that little bit of an overlap there suddenly moves that vase that you already liked as your favorite part of the drawing to the front, moves that large vase that is cropped on this side. That is another way that you've overlapped, because you've said it is behind one vase and it's large enough that when you crop, it's like saying it's off your peripheral vision. So you've already begun to determine that there is the illusion of space. So that's not something that was in our assignment, but it's a good way as we look at the homework and the projects as they come in to introduce other topics that sort of organically would flow, that would make sense as we're looking at something. So again, a really nice piece. What I liked is everybody's homework was exceptionally well done. You've got line variety, which was one of the things we were looking for. You've used a variety of shapes. You've investigated not just the exterior contour, but that idea of cross contour. So very nice job. Let me turn, there we go. So Angela, what was your favorite part as you were working on this? What do you think is the most successful?
I'd have to say the duct tape in the back was my favorite part about it. I feel like I just captured it, and I was able to, I looked at the picture and I saw that, it had the writing in there, and so I was like, oh, let me see if I can't add a little bit of that detail. Yeah.
Okay, and that's cool because by recognizing that, so not only is it an open shape, and open shapes tend to sort of be fun. So you have 3 open shapes, because with open shapes, you see a shadow on the outside and on the inside. But the inside also had a detail that allowed you to capture, once again, the fact that there was a curve, the fact that it was disappearing as it curved and was blocked by the front part of the roll. So it had all kinds of additional opportunity. You got to sort of reinforce what the shape and the cross contour lines were already telling the wiewer. What's some comments about this piece? Something that you find either very attractive or that was something you were working with when you were doing your own?
It's very subtle, but in the cup in the front, that top line around the edge of the cup, I really, really like how you did that, because it really shows the light on the one side and transferring to the dark on the other side. You really got that transition very smoothly across the top of the cup.
And that's a nice observation of a small detail. And small details often are what really help to pull a design or a drawing together. So that kind of subtlety, just that beautiful little light to dark gradation or transition, is something that really adds some specific focus and detail. Is there anything else? There's some there's something in one particular area that I'm just really attracted to. Not that that is necessarily going to mean other people are going to be attracted to this, but is there anything in this drawing that captures your eye? Because you're like, oh, I like that. That's sort of unusual.
I really like the shadows
Yeah, what about
and how the shadows are like not straight lines.
yeah.
You understand what I mean? Like there's a lot of wave in them. It's very like organic.
Yeah, I mean, that's another great descriptor, organic. There's sort of this electricity in those cast shadows that is very attractive. I find myself constantly, I just keep spending time down here in this corner because I find it really interesting how the cast shadows come up and almost vibrate and then transfer into the object shadows, the shadows on the physical shape itself. So that's another example of that quality, that third part where you have whatever the material you're using, whatever the subject, and that third part that is generally what gives a designer a drawing some particular interest. And that's what the artist sort of does, how the artist interprets or puts some kind of bit of themselves into it. So those cast shadows have a lot of interest. They're not expected. They're not necessarily what you might automatically think of when we were working with that technique. Any other comments on this piece? Again, really nice piece. So as I said, beautiful. Here's an example too, just compositionally to add another, excuse me, term. My voice may give out before we're done today. I don't know what's going on. This is called a triangular composition. And generally, once again, the way we perceive as Westerners, this is much more of a Western thing. If we were studying design in Taiwan or in Southeast Asia, there is a difference. There are different preferences in terms of how we tend to favor the arrangement of parts. But in a Western mind tends to really like the stability of three shapes. So this happens to be one of those very stable compositions, and a triangular composition can exist like this, where the base is at the top and the third object is at the bottom, which happens to be a little more dynamic, meaning it is a little more active, but it still has a lot of stability. So that object that is in the front sort of acts, it sort of projects itself forward. Once again, we're describing space because the way we interpret shape, this object in the front is almost tangent. It's almost coming right there into our immediate vision, like right in front of our face. And it's overlapping both of those. It's overlapping that object. It's overlapping that cast shadow. This object is cropped, which is a kind of overlap, meaning it again is going out of our peripheral vision. And this cast shadow here and this handle also seem to give us a description that there is some space that's behind those objects. So this one, once again, is dealing with those kinds of arrangements that our brain and our eyes interpret as describing space. And the term I was trying to think of in my earlier senior moment is gestalt. Has anybody ever heard the term gestalt from social psychology or psychology 101? Anybody ever heard that term? Gestalt was a German theorist from the 20th century in early psychology, who determined that humans, the way we see things is we always want to find order, even if we have to place order on top of what we're looking at. And in the visual arts, the way Gestalt works, one of the ways it works, is we want to interpret and understand meaning in whatever we see. So that idea of organizing in an illusion that we want to read it like the space we perceive is part of our natural tendency to want to assign order and meaning to whatever we're looking at. Okay, so So let's jump to the next one. Again, nice drawings. Another really cool, very different kind of composition. And this is Madeline. Talk a little bit. What were some of the decisions you made, and what do you like about your drawing?
So the main thing I wanted to do, I did chocolates again because that was fun to do for my sketch. But one of the things that I wanted to do with the contour lines was really emphasize the light and the shadow on the boxes and on the candies, because since they're kind of a shiny material, there's a lot of different kinds of specific little chunks of light and shadow on them to give it that shine. So that was kind of my main priority with it, was to add those shadows into it, even just subtly, like on the lint box at the top, like they're very, very light on it because they were very subtle little changes of color on the box. So I wanted to convey like how expressive the light and shadow was on each of the objects.
Now that's a really that's a great way to describe something that was a priority as you were working. And that's always cool when you're self-aware that as you're working, you're recognizing something that is grabbing your interest, and therefore you want to focus on as you're drawing. So those kind of subtle reflections like cellophane or plastic or glass, they're always really fun. They can be a challenge, but they're absolutely a fun challenge to figure out how to work through them. What is a part in this drawing where that notion of transparency and reflective material really is conveyed well? Where do you find it?
During the wrappers around the chocolate.
Yeah, I mean, those, so down in here?
No, the top ones, the top
Okay.
wrappers.
Yeah, those are just, aren't those amazing? There's just all kinds of cool stuff. And on my screen, I just have to keep shoving my face in close to see some of the really subtle variation. But Javier, I completely agree. This area just becomes a beautiful composition in itself, because every one of those shapes has a shape which is held within some other kind of material, and the material holding the shape is also casting a shadow. And there's even some variation starting to happen in the cast shadows, where a solid object is casting a harder line than the transparent plastic as far as a cast shadow. So sometimes as you're working like that, almost becomes a composition within a composition. It's a really nice job. What is something else, some other comment about this drawing? What is very different about this composition?
The amount that there is in the drawing, there is a much bigger variety
Okay.
in just shapes and general sizes of things.
So that, again, really good observation. So you're talking about a variety of scale and a variety of shapes. So one of the cool things, we've not even gotten to the point. We've talked about the fact that when you can identify something with a name, shape, texture, line, value, space, and when it's present, color, that those are the elements, the building blocks. What we haven't talked about is that with those building blocks, just like if we were writing, the building blocks are the letters and the words, and then how you arrange them are all of the rules of grammar. In art and design, what you do with line, shape, value, texture, color, space are known as the principles of art. And one of those is variety. So this has a great deal of different kinds of shapes, kinds of size of shapes, and relationship of shapes. So that's a nice segue into that next step of how you begin to think about parts within a composition. What else about this composition? What's our viewpoint? It's the first one we've seen that has this particular viewpoint.
It's directly above. Do they just call that bird's eye? I remember you saying that was a challenge.
Yeah, that's exactly. So directly above can be called bird's eye, can be called aerial. But yes, we are up there looking straight down. The more you change the viewpoint from a typical, like what we expect based on, standing or sitting, the more you cause the viewer to have to start interpreting your particular perspective. Once again, that third thing, the artist's content, what the artist is putting into it. The other thing that's present is when you go to a bird's eye like this or an aerial perspective, and on top of that, almost all the shapes, let me grab a bigger, sorry. There we go. And everything, tangent, cropped, 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 cropped. So you've got cropping occurring on all the sides. The more you crop, the more abstracted a composition becomes. And this being an aerial perspective, a bird's eye view, and heavily cropped, means that you really start to look at this as a abstracted view of a collection of objects. So the shapes you're looking at, this would be a perfect example of that balance between what we think of as positive shapes we can identify and negative shapes that are made as a result of the space around those shapes that we can identify. So you can say like candy, 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 boxes, and then all that other space around it becomes equally interesting. It's like it's all balanced in the piece. Any other comments on this one before we head to the next one? Again, cool piece. Okay, so Javier, as you were working through this, what is it that you enjoyed the most, that you think is the most pleasing part of it?
I don't really know. It was all kind of the same.
So is there some part of it that you think works better when you look at it?
Maybe the cube.
Okay. So what is it about the cube that might be different, that you find attractive or more interesting to look at?
There aren't any waves in the lines. They're just more angular, more kind of restrictive.
Okay. So cube is geometric, it's planar, and you were seeing those flat geometric sides as something that would have repeating geometric lines. So it seems to have more of a rigid, solid feel, or a different kind of solid. So that's one of those interesting things when you're contrasting an object that is curvilinear versus an object that is geometric in terms of a solid. Comments, something that you're drawn to in this piece?
There's one thing that I noticed right away is that the lines that you did inside all of the shapes match the type of shape that it is. So the bottle has very curved and like fluid lines, and the cube has the straight lines, and the cup to the side has that texture that's on the outside. The inside matches the feel of the outside of the shape.
Again, a nice observation, again, pointing to exactly what hopefully we'll just get better and better at doing, and that is trying to make all of the lines and value that we are using reflect in as specific a way as possible the subject that we're working with. So I think that's a great description of what he has happening. And yeah, that little,
And
go ahead.
also the width of the lines. I like the different use of the widths that he used.
Yeah, that's another really good. This one has really wide, obvious line variety. So you've got that extremely heavy, thick line that is present particularly in the cast shadows. And then you've got a broad range from thick to thin present on the cross contour that's happening on each of the shapes themselves. Any other comments? We're going to be, not immediately, but we're heading into enhanced techniques, and then we're going to add perspective, which is a particular drawing technique to what we already have been learning. And the one thing about perspective is that it's one of the few times that there are actually rules, like step-by-step rules to get a certain kind of result. So here's an example. That cube is pretty much a 1-point perspective, something we haven't really talked about yet. Light tends to work in some ways like perspective. So you're telling us that your light source is sort of over here somewhere. And as we work today, when we do this next enhanced technique and where we're heading next week on Tuesday as well, is to really start focusing on how specific light and shadow can work. So you're absolutely on the objects conveying light, hitting on that light side. And then what happens is the cast shadows will always come away from the base. So if your light's there, that exact shape you have would likely work. It just would the origin of it would be within the base. So similarly, so as we move, that's just one of those little things that'll add and enhance the illusion that you're trying to get. Okay. Very nice. So let's see what we've got next. So Daniel, talk about what interested you the most as you were working through this. What did you find to be your favorite part of this sketch?
I would say the pepper. If y'all could tell it was a pepper. I don't know. That and the knife. I don't know if you all have seen like cooking knives they got like this weird like heat treated kind of design on the side of them. That's what I was trying to make it look like, but
Oh, cool. Okay. And one, like that knife, for example, you're talking about that surface. So you looked and tried to invent a way to convey that with that line pattern.
Mhm.
And that's that perfect example again of subjective, where the artist makes choices that are based on what you think is going to convey something. So, I mean, I keep sort of saying that because that's one of the cool things looking at these drawings. All of you were making very personal decisions where you were interpreting the technique to try to convey a kind of specific, oh wait. Sorry, I just now hit the chat box. So just trying to convey a specific material or kind of surface. So again, really, I think the pepper is interesting in a particular way, and I think the knife has a whole different kind of thing going on. Comments? Somebody, what is something that catches your attention in this?
I actually really loved the knife, and I had made a comment on that. But I also see that, you have the little circles down at the bottom, kind of like knives do if you look at the edge. So I like the fact that you also caught that detail and not just the heat treatment. And then on the bottles, you can kind of tell where you left the open space. I think that's where the light is coming from. So kind of from down in the left-hand corner, sort of. You left that open area for possible reflection.
Nice observations. All kinds of different suggestions of surface, and then an absence of any value to suggest a highlight. Other comments? Something that either you were working with in your own drawing that is happening in Daniel's, or something that you didn't expect that catches your attention in this drawing? One of the things that's interesting, and since we talked about it once, you may be noticing it again. This is a triangular composition. So this is what is considered the most stable, where the base of the triangle is towards the bottom of the composition. And you have three objects that are arranged in a way that the weight is to the base. So this is about as stable an arrangement of parts. And one of the things that I think really saves the drawing from feeling like it is extremely anchored is the fact that you chose to put those diagonal shadows. So those diagonal shadows tend to add a little bit of action or a little bit of movement to what is a pretty stable kind of composition. And I think that's a really nice combination. The pepper, which you pointed out as your favorite at first, what's cool is that's very much that notion yesterday when we were looking at the hand, and I talked again about a wireframe or a modeling of a shape. The lines that are going around that, the way you use cross contour, almost feels as though you're sculpting a pepper out of like a soft wire mesh. It seems to have that kind of definition of the topography, the shape of that pepper solid. And once again, I think that's a really good tool to keep in mind for everybody. If you hit something that looks difficult or you're not sure of the shape, if you just think about it first, almost as though you're doing a cross contour line around the whole shape, that helps you to know how the light and the shadow would fall on the space. Very nice. Let's go ahead and see what we got next. Okay, Tessa, talk about your piece, some of the decisions you made, and what parts or part of this is your particular favorite.
So for this piece on my desk, I have like a huge lamp that I used to draw with. And so I just grabbed like a bunch of stuff in my house, a candle, and then there's this like, I don't know, it's like a hand painted vase like from Mexico. I don't know what it is. But I decided to try and use the dramatic lighting to create some interesting shadows. It didn't work too well with the glass candle because the candle kind of absorbed the sorry about that. But it didn't work too well with the candle because it kind of like absorbed the lighting. I ended up using a lot of my drawing pens for this. Don't talk, I'm going on. I'm sorry. There's my brother's playing video games and it's really hard to talk. So if I mute myself, that's why.
That's the fun of live in-house classes.
So for most of my drawing, I tried to I didn't want to I didn't want to make like because like hard lines don't exactly like exist, like hard outline shapes don't exactly like exist in like real life. So if you like look close enough on like the left side of the lamp, I did like a dashed edge to like give the imagination of like the outline of the lamp, but like it's not like a hard line. And it also helps represent that like it's like a lot lighter. And then I started using like a really big marker, and then it kind of messed me up. So
Well, what's cool is that where you have this extremely strong dark on the right, and then that broken line, and the design term for that is a implied line, where it starts and stops, is that you do read this side as having light hitting it, and this side as being in a strong, much stronger shadow. So by going to marker on this, what it does is it really focuses on that kind of high contrast line pattern, because the line is absolutely sort of placed front and center. So your composition is interesting too, because again, you have all of your objects, you're cropped on the bottom, you're cropped on the side, and you're cropped on the top. So almost all your objects are cropped, which gives us a focus that once again, once that happens, you are beginning to abstract the viewpoint. What are some comments about this piece?
I really like the bottle and how basically the lines that she did are very straight and jagged, and that gives the illusion that it's a see-through bottle, that it's made of glass, possibly metal, but it has shine to it. So.
Again, that's one of those things that it's good to be attentive and notice, because the material, what's called the local value, the object itself, whatever the material it is in terms of the quality, that's one of those things that is the challenge that we're now heading into. So we're going to talk about a technique today that will help you to even enhance that more. So trying to convey when something is shiny or transparent or completely transparent, like clear glass, or another challenge is something that's really just dark, the whole object's dark. Those become one of the challenges that's almost as great as that idea of light and shadow, which we talked about yesterday, that was showing up as a challenge that most of you noted from yesterday's class exercise. So I think that's a great thing to have noticed. But something else about this piece. If you wanted to get bold and make a suggestion, what suggestion do you think might enhance this? So I'm gonna just throw a suggestion out there. When you're dealing with marker, it gets really hard. Let's see, overlapping. Okay, so that's a good suggestion. One of the things that makes this interesting is the fact that your objects are cropped acts as a kind of overlap, because anytime it's cropped, it's as though you're pushing the subject so close in the viewer's face that it's going off in their peripheral vision. If, for example, in any combination, there had been an additional overlap. So let's say, for example, let's see if I can draw this without getting all gummed up. So let's just say, for example, that this shape, and you added it, had it just done something like that, that would have changed the position of, in terms of the space, and just that little bit of an overlap might have created a little pop, once again, of energy where you're aware of a physical overlap of two parts. So that's a possible suggestion that could have enhanced it. What I was thinking, and again, remember suggestions, and as we get more and more into this, I'm going to encourage more and more suggestions, and they're just suggestions. This piece would be a blast with marker to see some pointillism. So I was trying to imagine, I'm going to see if I can do this without, I mean, I would do this a little denser, but I was trying to imagine a zone up towards that left corner where it was, where there was some pointillism, and then let that pointillism, as soon as it got down to this zone, basically just dissolve. So in reality, you'd be looking at a denser pattern of pointillism up towards the top that would fade out as a way, again, to just create a little bit of energy in the environment, in the space, and to enhance, again, that suggestion of light that is coming from the upper left, and then the light that is flooding over the bottom part of it. That was just something I was thinking when I looked at it, because that lamp is so strong and so well communicated. Any other comments? Okay, let's see what we've got next. So Peyton, talk about, as you were working through this, what part or parts of the drawing were you most pleased? Do you think were working the best with this notion of contour and cross contour?
I guess my favorite would be the bowl, just due to the lines and the lightness and the darkness of it, the shadowing, and the different use of spacage as well with the bowl, because it's more up front and forward than the other two drawings.
Okay. And that's one of those things. So what you just noted is something that, once again, as you were organizing your composition and your viewpoint, by pulling that one object way to the front and cropping it, and it's cropped on two sides of the composition, you again have said, I'm going to take my viewer, because you can control. That's one of the cool things is being an artist and how you set up a composition. You're controlling, you're like literally grabbing somebody and you're controlling how they see your subject. In this case, you've pulled them in really close. That cup is down here. Like it's down so close that, again, it's almost out of the peripheral vision. So that creates some interest. Some comments.
I like the shading that they did for the shadows for the objects. They're all very different from each other. There's a good variety in them.
Javier, that's pointing out a really nice example of that notion that as an artist, you get to have those subjective choices. So again, that third part, artist content, where you're making choices based on what you think are going to be interesting. And in this case, as you pointed out, a variety of different ways to communicate a cast shadow. So a very even line pattern, a very dark cropped curve pattern, I'm sorry, a hatch curve pattern, and then a very loose scumbled sort of scribble pattern. So completely different. The more you make your own subjective choices, that's another way that often a piece will become more and more slightly abstracted. So that's a good observation. Something else that grabs your attention.
The mirror also grabs attention in the upper left-hand corner.
And what is it that's cool about the mirror? Why is it that you find yourself looking at that?
I think it's because of, it's not negative space, but the diagonal lines on it.
Yep, I mean, that's a good, what happens is that had that just been a circle, the shape itself would probably, because again, we want to identify things, we'd probably be going, okay, that looks like a mirror. But the moment you put in, you add something that describes the fact that there is a surface there and that something is going on in that surface, that instantly gives more information, creates a different kind of material. We read those diagonals as sort of indicating something that's slick and reflective, contrasting with, for example, on the little zipper bag back there, where you're aware of an entire sort of dark surface. So it once again presents a contrast of kind of texture, kind of material. If you're going to make a suggestion, is there any suggestion that anybody would offer for this piece? Because gosh, I will always, the one thing and as I start to leave, I didn't leave comments before this critique or this discussion, but I generally will always leave suggestions. And once again, that doesn't mean you have to do whatever I suggest, but it just means that art is collaborative. So absorbing reactions and suggestions is a way that you can continue to refine the skills or the specific piece if we were working through a piece. And Aram, I completely would agree. So give it a surface to sit on. So they're sitting on a plane. We know there's, because once again, that's that notion of Gestalt. We want to understand. We will go as far as possible to understand and create order in what we're seeing. So we see three objects and we want to place them on a plane, because that is what we're going to do. That's how our brain works. So giving it a surface to sit on, it might be as simple as, if let's imagine that there was just a line introduced with some kind of value pattern, that went from dark to light or dark to light. I mean, it could go in any direction, dark to light. Then all of a sudden, those objects are physically on a plane and that plane ends. So it could be as simple as just giving an end somewhere to that surface so that we read them as existing in one space, and then there's another space that's even farther back. And one of the cool things is when you're designing, and this will be more important as we get to some of the projects coming, I always have students who are like, yeah, but I couldn't figure out how to put the reflection that was showing up on the window that was in the background behind what I was drawing. And what is wonderful about being a visual artist, in the same way that now any digital designer can do it as well, is you're the one determining how the composition works edge to edge. Myself or a viewer does not have what you were using as your subject in front of them. What they have is the world you've created inside of your composition. So you can make changes and edits that make your composition work better. So even if a table didn't end somewhere in this composition, if your composition becomes more interesting, because you add a suggestion of a table edge, then go ahead and do it, because what's important is how well the drawing works, not necessarily whether the drawing conveys a specific subject that inspired you that none of us are ever going to see. Okay, so we're not doing a rendering class. Rendering is where you absolutely are doing a studied reproduction of exactly what you see. Instead, we're trying to figure out how to make a beautiful composition using whatever techniques we're manipulating. So that's one of those things that's sort of fun. You get to sort of do some things that you think would enhance. Any other, if you were going to make any other suggestions, is there anything you can think of? Okay, and as we move forward and we do some more drawings, and especially when we start talking about three-dimensional illusion and linear perspective, oops, there's some little things. So the base, for example, the base of this, that little edge you have would probably start like that and then end. There's just, that's like a really minute technical kind of thing. But the way that different shapes exist dimensionally is just something that comes with observation and practice. Okay, let's see what the next piece is. And Matt, so talk about what is your favorite part, and you made a distinct decision as you worked through this. Pull your volume up a little bit. Barely. Go to your go up to your volume and take it down to nothing and then pull it back up again.
Hello?
There we go. That's
There you go.
perfect.
Awesome. I was saying I liked the mug, like the shadow on the front, and like the difference in like thickness of the line and darkness of the line, and especially like the shadow at the middle of the top, how it's like distinct from the rest of the shadow.
Okay, so you've got some variation going on there that you're liking.
Yep, that's it.
As you were working through this, there was a way you worked with your cross contour. What is it that you did consistently?
Just like straight lines.
Yes. So, and we ended up giving those a name after this assignment. You were using pretty consistent, what would be considered hatch lines. So repeating same direction contour lines. And that's one of those, once again, subjective decisions that does have an effect in how the drawing feels. Does anybody have an observation? That choice of how Matt used those repeated sort of single direction lines, what sense does that give the drawing? What sort of an attitude or a feeling does that convey in the drawing?
There's a sense of uniformity between all objects.
Yeah, that's again another really good descriptor. There's a really unifying sense to the whole piece. Something else that you could say about the way that using a consistent single kind of approach through a piece, what it does when you look at the piece. So Aiden, do you have audio working now?
Yeah, I don't know what happened to my other laptop. The audio just was not working, so I switched to my other one and it's working.
Oh, good, good. So if you were looking at this, can you get is there a different way that this drawing feels because Matt made that decision to use a very similar kind of single direction cross contour line through the composition.
Yeah, so with him using the same line, it kind of gives like the idea of that the light is over in the left-hand corner and it's shining down on it, which allows the shadows to push towards the bottom right corner.
Okay, so it's got that nice definition of where the light and the shadow are. Now, let me see, I'm going to do something real fast if I can get this to, sorry. Everything's covering different things in my screen. So I'm going to jump. Let me find a different to try to compare. So I'll just jump here for a second. So let's look at that piece for a second. And then, and now I just lost it. And then this piece, what, is there a difference that would be something you can think of as far as a way you can control a certain kind of feeling if you choose to work with a single kind of line approach or technique throughout a whole piece? Like, how does this, if you were trying to, if you had to use an adjective, how does this feel? If you're comparing this to, and it's hard because they're different compositions, so it's hard to compare it directly to some of the other drawings. Anybody get a sense that's different about how that single consistent use of, in this case, a cross contour line, how it makes a drawing feel, design? So would it seem accurate, or would it make sense to you if I said, I think when you do that, you create a sort of a soft volume, a sort of rhythmic quality to it, when there's a great deal of different kinds of, for example, line weight variety, line pattern variety, cross contour variation between different shapes within the object. There tend to be, you're putting different instruments at play. When you use a single consistent approach, it's as though we have 3 guitars working, and there's a little bit more of a harmonic feel to it. Does that seem like what a teacher says versus what might make sense when you look at the piece? So generally, if you go with one, if you want something to feel very calm and very sort of measured, you'll tend to use less variety of whatever the technique you're working with, less variety of all those variables, line weights. This one does have, what's nice is why it doesn't become uninteresting is while the technique remains very consistent, there is a wide variety of shape. So it's not like 3 of the same basic shape. It's once again using that, it's a variation of that triangular composition. So it's a very stable composition, which we tend to find pleasing. There's overlap present, which is one of those nice things that creates that illusion of space. So you have physical overlap indicated here. You have a corner. So that means you've got an object overlapping there. It's cropped at the top, which tells us about overlap. It has those slight diagonals, which create some interest that counter the other shapes. Let me grab a different color. once again, if you were thinking of that rule of thirds, and you look at those areas which tend to be sort of where we like to think about having some focus. Once again, you've got this shape, you've got this shape, and you've got this shape hitting in those sort of zones, not to mention the fact that you've got a shadow. If anybody is comfortable or works with any digital design programs like Lightroom or Photoshop, you can physically put a rule of third filter or grid right on top of anything you're doing. So, I mean, a rule of third can also be that you split a piece diagonally, and I didn't quite hit thirds there, but so that notion that a design can be perceived in split in three can work in a variety of ways. So sometimes when you're looking at something, that can just help you to figure out what might be a nice way to organize your viewpoint. Okay, so I think, again, a really nice piece. I love, and that was what's cool looking at these, that everybody is different. And this has a very different feel in terms of how that line technique was used than some of the others. Let's see, and here's an example. So Aiden, talk about some of the choices you made. So I should have just gone side to side. Two really different approaches to this, to using the same technique.
Well, I had never really used Sharpie for like a drawing class. I've never taken a drawing class before. So I was just kind of having fun with the fine point and then the other Sharpie. But my favorite part would probably have to be the little bit of overlapping with the teapot and the cup, and then like the small detail inside of it.
Okay, and what's going on there is completely, you are making a lot of choices that are completely subjective on how you were going to use a variety of different line patterns to convey those different parts. So that overall kind of radial grid that's on the teapot, that sort of invented radial pattern that goes around the outside of the cup, the inside is different. What's going on in the negative space between the two overlapping handles just becomes a really sort of animated or active pattern indicating a shadow. So you've just got a whole lot of subjective artistic content. And again, that's that term. Content is that one of the three parts that always refers to what is the artist's subjective part. So you've got a lot of subjective artist content. And once again, that starts to abstract the piece. So this piece begins to move away from absolute observed realism and moving towards an abstracted view, which again, the more artistic subjective choices you inject, the more abstract something generally becomes. So some comments.
I think it's interesting how the background is also shaded apart from the shadows of the object.
Mm-hmm. So that pattern in the background, what does that do to the overall composition in terms of space?
It makes the things in the back look further, I guess.
Okay, so you've got that consistent diagonal that goes through the whole piece. So you've got this sort of rhythmic pattern. So a repeated similar shape is one of those principles of art is repetition. So you've got a rhythm that goes through it. Does this seem to have more illusion of space or less illusion of space? So if you're looking at, it's like being at the eye doctor. This one or this one, which has less illusion of space?
The one we're looking at right now.
Okay. And that's one of those things, again, as you're working with a composition, there are certain things that if they happen, they will trigger, our brain is understanding the illusion of space. And in the same way, there are certain things that will flatten the space. So this becomes, when you have a consistent pattern like that through an entire space, what it does is it takes that, all the negative space, and it sort of pulls it forward and makes it a flat pattern that is combining with the shapes that are also patterns that are the positive shapes. So this becomes much more about, once again, that's another abstracted quality. This piece is moving much more towards what you would call a semi-abstract viewpoint, a semi-abstract composition. Other comments? Just to show real fast, if I was trying to make, not just choose a different color, but and you have to pretend that the background has nothing right now. But let's imagine I wanted to get that. I want to use the same pattern, but I want it to have a feel as though that same pattern is going to convey some kind of space. And I don't have as much control, but so this, if you could imagine that black was gone and I had done something like that, with a consistent pattern that went through, that change of scale, even where things were larger and closer together and became farther apart and narrower, that would be one step towards conveying the illusion of depth. So there's a variety of ways that you can either abstract and flatten an image into pattern, or create what are the sort of triggers that the brain interprets as the illusions of depth. Okay, so let's see what the next piece is. Okay. So Aram, talk about some of the very distinct and unique choices you made. Yes, you are. Okay.
Well, I definitely wanted to do something other than a still life because I feel like it'd be more interesting or challenging to try to get the technique down, I guess. And I also wanted to experiment with the cropping. It was fun. It was fun to make it. It was definitely difficult. I just wish like I would have maybe made the triangle a little smaller so it didn't make her head look kind of weird. And
What's
maybe
something, because you had asked when you sent this, you said, what do I think? And I thought, well, we'll just talk about it today. And the hair was the one thing that I focused on, because I really think that what's happening, there's a lot of really interesting things going on. What is a suggestion, something that might be a really simple way for that hair to become more integrated, more unified in the composition? Does anybody have any ideas?
I think if you would have put lines through it like a wave almost
So you could have
to
repeated
show
that.
movement more. Just be, it's because the face is so deep, like has so many details. I think that if it had more lines through it, like showing the movement, that it would have, I don't know, been more balanced inside of the triangle.
Okay, so there could have been more either repetition of lines. So there you also could have had some kind of in that repetition. And again, I don't have these, the control on these is not very subtle. But within that repetition, there might have been an opportunity to play around a little bit with scale. What I'm doing is not necessarily what you would have to do, but just to introduce what might be something that would add visual interest. So, because you're so drawn, you chose a composition that is so particularly strong. The format you're using is an inverted triangle. So it's a really powerful compositional shape that you've chosen. So it's a non-traditional shape. It is a triangle where the weight is on the top, so that it tends to have that energy that is projecting forward. So you've started with a really strong composition. Then you give us that focus. You've sort of played with that same tripart or rule of thirds, the way it's divided. So it's got all this energy that's focusing us on the eyes and the features of the face. So then what happens is, with that much strength, you want all the parts of the composition to somehow feel like they're as integrated or as important in the makeup of the parts. Other comments?
It's a really, I really like this though. It is really, really cool. Like it centers your attention right to her face and her eyes. And I think it conveys emotion, like a strong piece.
And again, I think that's accurate. The piece is very, very strong emotion. That format, when you start with that, it's a powerful format. So the shape, before anything went in it, already set the tone in terms of the kind of emotive feeling that you were likely going to work as a composition. What about the line technique she chose? Anybody have a comment about Aram's choice of the line technique that she used? So Matthew, what's something you could say about the choice of technique to convey the parts of the face?
Um,
Like, what
I
is it
like-
you really focus on?
I mean, instantly when I look at it, they focus on the eyes. I think there's a lot of detail there with like the shading and like the distance in between the dots and stuff.
So
is very
the
accurate.
dots, I mean, what do you think of that choice to use the stippling or pointillism as the medium, as the primary technique?
Are you asking me specifically?
Yes.
I think it works really well for this, like a face specifically, just because it allows for a lot more detail to be shown rather than just using simple lines.
Yeah, I think that's a nice, I mean, I think that's a really accurate comment. Does anybody else have any take on, because remember, you get to make choices, and this was a really distinct choice to use a lot of that stippling or pointillist approach through this. Does anybody have a reaction to that?
I think it gives it depth.
It gives it
For
depth.
something that could have been like flat, it shows texture and depth.
Again, that's a good, once again, really good descriptor. There is a sense of the texture. There's the sense of the contour of the face, but it's done almost in a minimalist way. So there's just enough information that you are reading that there is a surface and that there is some contour, a subtle light and shadow. So I think that's an interesting, there's a delicacy of that technique that contrasts to the power of the composition, the format, and that straight on portrait. So it's sort of a nice juxtaposition or contrast between that subtlety of the technique and the sort of direct power of the actual composition itself. So very cool. Nice piece.
Thanks.
Let's see what we've got next. Okay, so Rosalie, and by the way, what I did, and this is one when you photograph, just whatever light you used when you photographed this, shift to a different light. Try a desk lamp or something like that. Because what happened is when the image came through, it came through very yellow. So, and that's also simple, even if that happens, just put it on your phone, move over to where you see it says saturation, and then just toggle completely to the left. That's what I did to get rid of all the color.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I struggled with getting this on. I got onto VoiceThread, but I had just watched the first class and I did not know that this was going to be completely remote. So I apologize. I was thinking like I could ask someone or talk to you when I saw you on Tuesday. I didn't realize that we were doing this
Yeah.
the whole time. So
Yeah, it's going to be, again, the entire campus is remote for J-term.
yeah. So, but yeah, I got on VoiceThread. And kind of figured it out. And I was able to see everyone else's work, so that was good.
Good. So what part of this, as you work through this, what part do you think, like, what gives you the most satisfaction? What do you like the best?
The scrunchie, I think, was a good choice. I think if I had to do this over again, which I did it a couple of times, I don't think I would have used the other two objects because they were so flat. But yeah, it was good practice.
Okay, good. And what's fun is when you said scrunchy, that I'm glad that I know that. I like that shape. Did anybody else read that shape as something else, or is I the only one who missed that it was a scrunchie? Did anybody else read it as something else?
Kind of looks like a flower.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of cool. I thought it was a flower. I was thinking it was one of those like things that you can put in either in your hair or it was just some kind of a little flower shape. But it's cool that it's a scrunchie. It has a lot of descriptive surface to it, which is nice. It is highly variable in contrast to two very human-made, extremely regular shapes. Some comments. One of the cool things, one of the things I liked in this piece, and it was nice because it was consistent, everybody was doing it really well, is I like that you found ways to locate edges, since cross contour can describe any kind of surface, that also told you about what the material was. So where the scrunchy flower has a sense of this sort of irregular, folded upon itself feel, the other two shapes feel extremely rigid and regular. I thought that was a nice thing. Here's an example. If I was thinking about how a composition can change, how a format can change something, if I made that shift in this composition, does anybody think that that becomes a more interesting balance of positive and negative? That particular change in the format, in the edges. Does anybody think that makes it visually more interesting? Because one of the things you want to just always think about is that shape you begin with, how you are organizing your subject in that space. So how you're designing not just the objects you're drawing, but the shape that is happening as a result around each of those objects. So sometimes a simple tangent edge where something is touching or it just gets close will create more variety within that negative space. Okay, so let's see what we've got next. Oops, are we at the... Okay, so that was, we spent a little bit more time. Normally on homework, we'll just look through them rather quickly, but this first one, I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking. So what I'm going to do, because we're actually about where we normally would take a break, I'm going to do literally an introduction of two things that are going to dramatically, I think, dramatically enhance the range of what you can work with using cross-hatching and both or one of these two additional approaches, okay? So let me just stop sharing and I'm gonna do it over here because I always forget it's easier to do it before I turn the computer upside down. So we've been working with, I just grabbed a couple that were in process. We've been working with, this was cross contour, starting to get almost like cross hatching. This was just a sketch of, based on one of those photos that are in the folders where I just cropped it down and picked some parts. Still cross hatching. This was even more preliminary, just laying a sketch in. Again, cropping from one of those photos. So what I'm going to do, I'll grab this one first. I'm just going to take it and I'm going to add a little bit more energy. So rather than starting from scratch, and we'll do that at the end of class, I want to just do this without spending a lot of time. But this already had a nice looseness to it, but I'm going to just let my lines be a little less controlled than when we were doing that first example. So I remember that shadow that was in there sort of wrapped around the edge. So now I'm suddenly allowing my line to be a little looser, a little more expressive. So I'm combining a bit of a scumble kind of soft pattern right over what I had already done. Introducing a little cross hatching. So the only reason I'm doing that is the one addition now is you have a pack, little plastic pack of blenders. So I'm going to grab one of those blenders. And now I'm going to add blending as an option, meaning I'm not going to use it everywhere, but I'm going to draw with the blender too. So if you've got this nice, and I remember that the top of that shape was really dark. So I could suddenly use that blending tool to help. And I'm still thinking about what was the pattern from the cross hatching, but now I'm adding an additional quality of choosing in some places to create a blended edge. So for example, I could come into that cast shadow and I could say, I want that cast shadow to have a very different feel. And those blenders are going to pick up the graphite from the pencil and really blend it nicely. So just with that little bit of work into this piece, it became very different. So the blender, it becomes a new tool that can be added as you're working with the cross hatching. So that won't be in the homework that you're doing right now, the one that is going to end up being in marker, but this is going to be a tool as we head into a different project. So if I look at this one, which is much earlier on, I just started to lay this in. There's another technique very related to the blending, and it's called laying in a ground. So I know that this old chrome pitcher, it's actually an old chrome martini pitcher. It shows up in a couple of those different collections of objects that are in your folders. I'm now just going through and putting a little bit of value right over the whole thing, just that shape itself. There's a glass vase sitting in front of it. So we're here, I just picked some parts and used the blender right in my crosshatch pattern. Another option is I can take one whole area, and all this is a cotton rag. I just took a piece of an old t-shirt and cut it. So if you have a rag drawer in your house, you can get a nice soft piece of fabric. If not, you can use a paper towel, but the soft fabric's going to work better. And I'm going to just go inside of that one shape before I do anything more. And this is called a ground. So I'm going to set a middle, in this case, sort of a middle gray down through the entire shape that I want to look like that shiny chrome object. So notice I didn't do it everywhere. I did it just in that one shape, because now when I want to work back into that, I can draw light using my eraser, just like it was a white piece of charcoal. And I can reintroduce the darks. So if I know that suddenly I have a very light value that I can control, take it back towards the pure white of the page, and I can go, try not to use your hands. I try to even brush off the stray marks with a brush or something, so I'm not getting any oil into it. So now I could go back with that cross hatching, and I could really enhance, since I want this to feel very much like that high contrast that you see in a shiny chrome kind of shape. I have that blended value that was down first. I have the erased value that I put next to it to indicate a highlight, and then I can enhance where I want it to be really dark again. I have something from, for if this was a 15-week semester, I would have had you buy one of these. This is just a metal template, but you can also just take a piece of paper and cut the shape in the paper and use it. This would be if I want to take a highlight and I want it to go back to pure white. A template just means you can erase like crazy and know it's not going to go outside of that shape. So if I wanted to go in and really try to control and reintroduce a brilliant white highlight, cutting that shape out of a piece of paper, inside of a piece of paper, and holding it down to erase. Or if you ever took in high school or some other place a drafting class, or if you happen to work at a company where there are engineers, these kind of templates come in handy as well. Okay, so putting a ground down or blending value. Those are the two new techniques. We're going to talk about those and look at a bunch of examples at the end of class. If I was just laying out, and this was complete clutter. This was a detail out of one of those photos that just has plates and brushes and things just piled on top of each other. This might be an example where I could grab one of my dark pencils, because I know, for example, this object is black plastic, and that's a big old pain to try to figure out sometimes how to convey that. So that might be one of those things where I'm suddenly not doing cross-hatching. I'm using just that graphite on the side of my pencil, the way I'm holding it. And I'm just going to put a great deal of value down before I've done much work at all. So once again, this is that notion of setting in a ground. So the word ground means you're putting some kind of value down as your base. So let's say I did that there, and I could even look at these objects and say, wait, there's another really dark shape that's back there, and all of these things that are piled. I put a little of that value down. I can either use that soft cotton, or I could use a blender if I wanted. So this is still just a really loose line sketch. But before I do more work on my sketch, I can actually begin by first getting in what'll be some base value. So if I did that, then I could keep working on my sketch, keep finding where I want some much more controlled line value to be. If I want to enhance, let's say this black plastic becomes much stronger on this side, I could bring a nice loose, expressive crosshatch kind of line back in. If I want to show a reflection up on that top edge, all my erasers are getting worn out. Yours should still have a nice sharp edge left on them. So if I wanted to bring a highlight in as I worked through this, I could draw that highlight right back in, because as long as you haven't gotten the page all full of the oil from your skin, so don't do this. Once you do this, you've stained the page. But as long as you're just keeping those blends that they've been blended together with cotton or one of those blenders, I can always draw right back in and go back to a pure white highlight. So using the blender and using a blended area called a ground as a foundation, as a base, those two things can make what you already know about cross-hatching into something that is gives you a much broader, more expressive range of possibilities. So what I'd like you to work on during the work time. So in the hour or about 45 minutes before you take a break, is set in a smaller, and this is going to work much better, by the way, on white. So this is the one time, because if you put a ground on the newsprint and you start erasing a lot, you're not going to ever get back to white, and the paper will start to degrade much faster. So in this case, the white paper is going to work better. Set in a small, smallish format, and work from some objects that are either in your house, or you can use any of the photos. Once again, if you go through, you'll find some that have the chrome things or clear glass, but just find something that has a couple objects in it. And, I'm encouraging you now to loosen up a little bit with those lines as you build whatever that is the subject you're working with. So whatever that is that becomes, let's say, because I know I put some in there that have a lot of brushes that have the chrome bezels at the top. Set it in, decide, does using a ground make sense? In which case you do want to get rid of any guidelines that you're not going to want to show up, and just experiment with putting in. And again, that's where you're going to want to go to your 6B. So let's say this is a really dark object, and I'm working with a much looser, more expressive approach. So if I already decide on that nice vase that it's going to have a very strong dark foundation within this composition, I can put that in place early in my drawing and then keep building the drawing around it, knowing that, once again, as you add parts, as you think about that cross-hatching technique, and the cast shadow or whatever it might be, you also have the option. You don't want to blend everything or the whole drawing changes completely, but one of the ways you can add contrast, I already lost, there's my blender, is by having some parts blended and some parts not so blended. So your blending tool just becomes another one of those drawing tools that you can use. So just sort of experiment with a smaller format composition, doing cross-hatching, set a ground in for some shape, and mess around with the blender as well. Okay, does that make sense? Very good. So we'll come back in about an hour. So you got like 45 minutes to mess around with those two new tools, adding them onto all of what we've done with cross-hatching, scumbling, stippling, invented texture, hatching, but try to add a little bit more sort of physical, loose gesture as you work through, okay? And then we'll talk about where that's heading in the last part of today's class. Any questions before I mute? Okay, very good. So work, and remember that at around 11:30, you want to take a break. If you're still working and you haven't taken a break, take a break for that 15 minutes before we come back at 11:45. Sehr gut. Okay. So hopefully adding those additional options made this feel a little bit more natural. The reality is most of the drawings you're going to see, at least drawings we think of as artistic or by artists, will have a bit more of a combination, some blending, ground, cross-hatching. Rarely are you going to see a really just strict one technique kind of drawing. So with that in mind, what I want to do is I'm going to share screen and just look at a couple examples and then talk about how this relates to what will be our first major project, okay? So, oops. One of the things to keep in mind, because we're going to end up spending several hours on a drawing, is that you want it to be loose. So I picked some pages of just sort of exercises in loose pattern, cross-hatching that is just inventive and much, much less technical drawing looking. A nice, very fast study sketch, in this case of a little pepper shaker. But you want to keep things really nice and sort of high energy. Come here. Sorry, the cat is having a fit. Here's a nice example. You can see all of the movement of the technique. You can see that some blending occurred and drawing back over blending. Another really nice example. This one you can see that there are areas where a very soft ground was placed. One that is just extremely loose. All of the lines just being very active. And in this case, it's ink. So this is an example where you can't see the blending. We're going to be using pencil. So if you look at these three, you can really see that addition of the ground working from an area of blended value. So especially if you look at the trombone on the far left, there's a softness that would be very hard to achieve without that option of working with blended value. The guitar in the middle has a really nice feel of both line technique and blended, or the art term for it is burnished value used in combination. Here's one that is, again, so I'm just sort of showing the difference if you don't have the option of that blending or ground. So when it's a pure ink drawing, it's always going to be just about line. There is no option to blend when you're working with ink. Here's a really nice pencil sketch. Once again, you can see both the crosshatch technique loosely in place and the blending that is occurring along with the crosshatching. This one is on a different kind of paper, but you can see that there is actually a ground put over everything, and then the erasing is what introduces that light value. So this would be an example where instead of doing the ground, the blended gray on one or two parts, the entire page was begun on top of a blended value, a ground. And then the eraser becomes the tool to get all of those light areas. This one is just absolutely beautiful. This is a perfect example of a ground, putting down that very soft gray, and then working with both cross-hatching and your eraser as a drawing tool as you move towards, in this case, a really pretty sophisticated handling of a portrait. Here, this is ink, so I just put it in because it related to the request yesterday and an option I'm going to make in the assignment. But again, you see that all that cross-hatching, in this case, just ink, so no blending in the eye, and that gets us back. So I'm going to go back to Blackboard. In the course materials, I'm just going to scroll down. Again, I made things smaller. It's getting easier. As soon as you open it, you see week 1. So we're just getting to the end of this, first week. So we're at the bottom of week 1. There's a file that says, so there's, by the way, what you're working on right now, homework 2. But if you go down to the bottom, it says crosshatch line folder, week 1 major assignment that overlaps week 2. So we're now talking about something that is just going to be what you're thinking about this weekend and doing a little work on Monday before we meet on Tuesday. There's a link here to a part 1 and a part 2 of a recording of my building the drawing. So a crosshatch drawing that would represent a couple hours worth of work, but going from the initial sketch to the finished piece in 2 different videos. What I always recommend, if you watch those, just select the 2 times so that you're speeding it up and you can sort of see the process happening pretty fast. This is an example of a 5-hour drawing by a student, and in this case, very, very softly handled, some blending, but a very crisp handling of the technique. There is a file here that says many possible clutter picks. So that is filled with possible subject, or you can design your own. So here's the project that you're going to begin to think about this weekend. And the goal is that Monday, you have figured out what you're going to work with, one of those photos or some objects you've collected, and you set in your basic loose, light line sketch. So when we meet on Tuesday, we'll be talking about this project for a little bit of the class and spending most of the class really talking about expressive approach. So we've sort of begun pushing on that edge of expressive, but we're going to do a complete exercise just in that. So like I said at the beginning and a couple other times, that you're working on things that are overlapping and are not necessarily exactly what we're working on in each of the classes that the project is overlapping. So we've been focused on cross-hatching. Now we have blending, ground, a looser, more expressive approach, and that's the sketch. If you want to set a ground in, you could set the ground in a while too, so that when we meet again on Tuesday, you're already beginning this project that isn't due until the 13th, next Thursday, the end of the day. But once again, we'll be doing different things each day in class. So don't count on thinking you could finish this next Wednesday evening. So you want to get started on it. So we're just thinking as though the basic subject is about cluttered objects, a lot of things put together. You're going to do a drawing that is really focused on what we've been focusing on in the last 3 days. A really interesting composition that has a balance of positive and negative space. Think about overlapping forms. Think about a variety of texture and value and line, using the broadest range of pencils that you have and as much line variety and technique variety as we've been working with. It's on white paper or the better paper if you bought that. And I'll talk about another option with that at the end. So think an absolute minimum of 11 by 14, the whole way up to 18 by 24 for those of you who bought the pre-pack at FCC and got that really big white pad. You can crop from any of the photos that are in the folder, meaning you don't have to take the composition as it exists, or anything you arrange. Remember, just because you put, 12 objects, or you've opened a drawer and looked at a bunch of, you don't have to draw everything. You get to design, you get to choose within that within that subject what your composition is going to be. So you're going to focus that it's still a crosshatch line drawing, but it can be very loose. You can blend, you can use ground, meaning put some of the blended dark or middle gray on some shapes or on the whole composition if you want to work that way. And then you're using cross-hatching with the pencils, you're using the blenders, you're using the eraser. All of those become tools. When I say some blending is okay, you don't want to have the entire drawing just become this big, blurry, blended composition, because then you sort of lose what makes blending beautiful. And that is that you're going to have a contrast. Sometimes a soft blended value makes much more sense, and sometimes an area or a texture that shows more of the linear crosshatch technique makes sense. So you're going to have both of those present in your drawing. A reasonable time expectation is 6 to 7 hours, and we'll spend, you'll have those work periods next week, because we'll have Tuesday and Wednesday, and there will only be one homework assignment in there. So you'll have time that you can dedicate from that time. Hold on, let's see, new message. Okay, that's fine. If you need to leave, just this is being recorded so you can watch the rest of this. Okay. 3 points extra credit if you turn in your process. So show me where you are by the end of the day Monday. Take a photo if you've laid your sketch in, or if you've started the sketch with some ground. So whatever you've turned in by the end of the day Monday, if you turn in a photo of showing me that you're involved already in the project, that's 3 points of extra credit. And I gave you 2 alternates if you want different levels of challenge. So one would be just like the assignment we discussed, except the subject would become either under my car's hood, attic stuff, or medicine cabinet. So that means the clutter is going to be you opening the hood of your car or some car, going into an attic, or I should have said basement, wherever would be just a lot of stuff that gets sort of stacked and stored, or opening a medicine cabinet. So that would be another option. In this case, we're talking edge to edge composition and virtually no page white left. The white would be where there are bright reflections or a flash of some kind of light. The challenge option 2, and I put this in before the conversation or yesterday, so now I think it's probably going to be ideal for an option. So challenge number 2 would be using a photo you take of part of your face, or it could be somebody else's, but I want you taking the photo. So don't find this online, you take the photo. So either take the photo and then crop it, or when you take the photo itself, crop some part of the face that you think is highly characteristic. That's completely up to you. Let's say somebody has, some really cool piercings and you want to focus on the ear, or some kind of tattoo that comes up and you're going to focus on a jawline with part of the neck. Whatever the case would be, you're not doing a whole portrait, you're doing some cropped part of the head. And it would be the same as option above. You're doing the same thing. You're looking for all of the same compositional and technique options as the other main assignment. The difference is it's just a more challenging subject. Okay, so those are the 3, the primary project. And then if you want to take one of the 2 alternate versions of it, you could either do the one that is under my car's hood, attic stuff, medicine cabinet, or the figurative. Okay, so questions.
So we pick any one of those pictures in the folder for the first one,
So
and then we can crop it however we want.
however you want. And if you notice, there is a folder now just for this too. So now you can go through the folder from the last, or these in that one that says many possible clutter picks. These are very specifically aimed at that idea of things that you could interpret as clutter. Okay. So there's quite a few images there. And that's any of those. And I think, wait, on the very bottom, for whatever reason, I don't know why I couldn't save this one. Oh, right there it is. There's even one of an engine. I don't know why I couldn't. And I was feeling slightly frustrated, so I just saved it as a document instead of an image. But there's even, and it's coming, there's even an antique car engine that is just crazy looking that is in there as well. It's just taking a while to open it. Here it comes. There we go. You probably can't see it, so let me share that. So that's in that file as well, okay? So those are the options if you don't want to set one up yourself, okay? So questions for the weekend? You've already turned in homework 1. Homework 2 is due by the end of Sunday. You likely have some of that done. So probably between now and Sunday, you can finish that up with 45 to 60 minutes. In that time somewhere, also just flip through and decide if you like any of the photos in the folder, or what would you like to work with, or if you've decided you want to do alternate number 1, then look at your attic or basement or medicine cabinet and think, is that what you want to work with, or do you want to work with some part of a head? So you want to just figure out this weekend so that by Monday, you know which subject you're working with, and you can set the basic sketch, the format. Is it a square? Is it a rectangle? What's the format you're working with? And get the basic sketch in place. And it would save you some energy if you put the sketch in place and you know you're going to use ground, that blended value in an area. You could set that in, okay? And then take a photo. So the end of Monday, whenever you're done working Monday, take a photo and send that to me, and you end up with 3 points extra credit. And that's where we'll be when we start class on Tuesday.
I have a question about the Sharpie
Okay.
piece that we're doing. You explained yesterday that we need to add emotion into the piece. How would you exactly do that?
Well, it's what I've been saying pretty much consistently. Try not to think about this like we're in a drafting class. So that's what I mean. So don't do sometimes when a black marker gets in your hand, you suddenly go back into this as though you're doing perfectly geometric grid patterns. And so it's not just because a pen goes in hand doesn't necessarily tighten up your approach. You still want to keep it sort of loose, as we've been doing with the examples from yesterday and what we just did with the practice today, and so that it does not feel like it is from a mechanical drawing class.
You just want us to keep it more organic.
That is correct.
Okay.
And so for that, we can use any of the photos from the past 2 days, right?
That is correct. So at this point, there's the larger folder in week 1, where there's the topic 1, and below it, there's just a folder of 15 photos. You could use any of those. You could use any of the photos we just pulled up if you want from the clutter, or there's a couple photos in that day 1 and 2 even. So now there's 3 different folders that have photos of objects in them. Okay. So I'm going to give another option, and I don't want anything to sound too confusing, but this is completely up to you. Completely up to you. I'm coming to FCC on Monday to pick up supplies at the bookstore. Which literally I'm going to, because it's 20 miles. So I'm going to drive there, get my supplies, turn around and come back. If you are interested, I will pre-pack the better drawing paper and a piece of a chunk of soft charcoal and have them there in bags. So if you want to meet in the parking lot at FCC at about 10:15 a.m. on Monday. I'm more than happy to hand you some better drawing paper and a piece of charcoal. That's completely up to you. If that's something you want to do, just send me an email and I'll just send you the details, like, look for me at such and such time in such and such car. I'll be masked. We don't even have to, we'll do pass off. If you'd rather, I'll set it on the ground and you can just come and get it. So that's an option. We will need, go ahead.
Don't we have class on Monday or?
No, we don't. We don't have class on Mondays during J-term.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Tuesdays through Thursday. Okay. Tuesday through.
That's why I said that what you're aiming for is to get the homework that you had from yesterday done by Sunday, and then
Work on the other one.
just
Got it.
get the basic sketch in place and maybe lay the ground in. And if you get really motivated, whatever you get done on it during Monday, take a photo and that ends up as extra credit. Then we meet on Tuesday, and you will need either the graphite stick or the charcoal, whichever you ended up with, because we're going to be doing a really very loose expressive style as a practice on Tuesday.
Do you have a preference for which one we actually use if we have both?
Do you have both?
Yes, I do.
Because originally I thought we were meeting together in a room. That's why I put graphite only, because there's people generally there's somebody who's allergic to the dust from charcoal. But if I had a choice for the technique we're going to be doing, charcoal works better.
Okay.
Okay. They both work, but charcoal just smears faster and gives you, when you're trying to be really expressive and create a lot of blends and blurs and movement, charcoal blends much faster. So everybody feels comfortable with, you know what you're doing. You've got a homework assignment that is loose. You're developing your composition, and then you're doing all of the actual line work with your fine tip marker, and then embellishing and pushing it for a variety by pulling in that broad tip and anything else you need to do with the fine tip. That's what you're working on due by Sunday evening. And then you are looking through the photos in the folder and deciding, do you want to do one of the clutter options that I've sort of taken already, or do you want to arrange your own objects, or do you want to do the either car engine, attic basement, or medicine cabinet option? Those would be much more where you go and you find it and you take a picture, you locate the composition and what's already there. Or do you want to do the either selfie part of your face or head, or use somebody else if you know somebody, like, for example, that has like some incredible, I don't know, piercing, or just has striking features that you want to use. That's completely up to you. So you have one primary assignment with two variations you can choose. Okay, so everybody feels comfortable with that? So we're good. Go ahead.
What's the so you said homework 3 or the project? So you said use the nice white paper for that?
For the one that for the one that you're just laying in, yes. Oh, that's true. So if you have gotten the better white paper, that would be the project to use. Part of that, if you bought the pre-pack at FCC and you got the sheet of Reeves paper, it's really big. It's so big that you're only going to be using a piece of it.
Oh, okay.
If you didn't get the Reeves paper, you can use the white paper you have, or as I said, you can go and see if you can locate, and it could be any variety of names. It could be Canson, Canson, which is a paper company, Mitientes, which is a paper company. Reeves happens to be a paper company I had never heard of until she bought that paper from a distributor for FCC. You're most of the time going to see that Canson, Canson, that company. If you happen to be coming and meeting me it's Canson, and when I look at it, because I'm looking across the room, it's about this distance. I'm guessing that is 12 by 16, 12 inches by 16 inches. So that's completely up to you.
In Canson, we can get at Walmart, you said? Okay, all right.
I couldn't find, Walmart was not clear if they have anything by the sheet. Michael's, at least online, said they didn't sell any paper in their stores by,
I've been.
Yeah.
They don't have anything like that. So,
yeah, by the sheet. They don't, they sell it by a pad, but then.
No, they don't.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
online, oh, they have it online. So I
they
guess
have
it's not
it, yeah.
in that store.
Or not in Frederick.
Yeah, it's too expensive to buy that. And like I said, the type stores that have it, Frederick used to have an architectural supply place that also sold papers, but that's been going now for a number of years. So to my knowledge, unless somebody is aware of it, there is no art supply place in Frederick.
Got it. So, so use the Reeves then for the third homework assignment or the project. And then
It's a project, yeah. So instead of a homework assignment, that's going to count as 3 homeworks. I mean, in terms of its value, because we're spending a fair amount of time working on that.
so how big does that one need to be then? So does
So I said 11 by 14 is the smallest, and I already forgot what. Oh, that's right. It's 11 by 14. Or if you really like this, if you like working big, you could go the whole way to 18 by 24, which is really big. The sheet that, if you're buying Reeves paper at FCC, it's bigger than 18 by 24. I want to say it's like 20 by 30 inches. It's a big sheet of paper. If you buy the Reeves, use half of it, because that way you'd have the other half in case you want to use it for another long-term project we're doing where a better paper would be an option.
So 11 by 14 is what the size is.
You do 11 by 14, that's the smallest size. That there's enough for probably 4 of those in a sheet of the Reeves paper.
Okay, all right.
Okay. And if anybody knows, I mean, if any of you are friends with somebody else in the class, or you know the person, or you could cut a piece of Reeves paper in half and share it. Okay. And again, if anybody wants to do the meet and get paper and a piece of charcoal gratis, just let me know. It was funny, the semester, you remember back the semester, I guess it was 2 years ago, where we started online and then it like all of a sudden went, or I'm sorry, we started in person and all of a sudden it went online. I actually had to like clandestine arrange to meet the people in that class in a parking lot. I had my trunk filled with all the projects, because since we didn't go back to class, they didn't have any of their supplies. So I had to, like, without FCC knowing, we were all masked, and I had to distribute all the supplies back to everybody in the Weiss parking lot in Frederick. So this won't be quite that shady looking. Okay, so if we are set, we ended up about a half an hour early today. Woohoo, it's Friday. It's very pretty outside. I mean, there's snow, but it's really, really nice, bright. And if anybody is interested, and I will share no opinion, but an interesting sentencing came down while we were having class in a major trial. So that might interest you. So any questions before I say week 1 is done? Okay, cool. I feel like I should gavel it. Very good week. Your work has been really good. I'll stick around for a little bit if you have any questions. Between now and Tuesday, you're welcome to send me questions or post something on VoiceThread if you want some input. Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Bye.
welcome. Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Professor, I had a question. If you could give me some input on this, on the second homework that we were given.
Okay, so wait, the one that you're working on now, the one that that ends up being in marker, that one?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is the second one I've done because the first one got ruined.
Okay, let me see what it looks like.
Hold on, is my camera? I still haven't done the shadow,
Uh-huh.
but I don't know. This is slightly better than the one I did previous to this one.
It's
But I don't know
got
if
really
this is-
beautiful line quality. It's an unusual viewpoint. You're absolutely at 100% at eye level, so that all the dimension is showing up because of value, meaning you're not above it, you see the opening, or below it that you see the curve. And that's an interesting thing. My suggestion is add an edge either for like a curved tabletop or the edge where a table meets a wall or something, so that when you add the cast shadow, you might also think about just putting a very slight hint of something where that tabletop edge is. Does that make sense?
So I would put like a line near this bottom portion, right? Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
that could be cool too. I didn't even think of that. Let me do something. Is it possible? Yeah, if you don't mind, if you take a picture of that and send it to me,
Yeah, I
you
can
do
do that.
that in the next, in the next hour or so. Before dinner tonight, I'll make comments in VoiceThread on it where I can use that little marker and like show you some ideas.
All right.
Okay, it's just
Yeah.
easier. That's the only problem with this is I'm moving my cursor. I'm thinking I can go up and grab a tool, but I don't have that option in a share on Zoom to like grab a tool and draw right over what you have.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, but I think
Yeah.
what you've got is a really strong start. It looks good.
All right. Thanks then. Have a good
You're
one.
welcome. Thanks. Bye-bye.